On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World, Season 3. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Our session today, The Brass Notebook, Devaki Jain in conversation with Malashri Lal. Devaki Jain, one of the foremost economists in India, looks back at the trajectory of feminism through a candid memoir in which her personal story interweaves with the development agenda of a new nation. At the age of 87, Jain has published The Brass Notebook, deliberately invoking Doris Lessing's classic, The Golden Notebook. The brass stands perhaps for the ordinary lives of women in India, amongst whom Jain found her vocation. Growing up in an orthodox Tamil Brahmin family, discovering her freedom at Oxford University, and moving on to an illustrious career in India and abroad, it's a story of change, perception, and empathy. Jain's professional life became devoted to the cause of women workers in the informal economy. Her work brought her in contact with world leaders, amongst them Gloria Steinem, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Vinoba Bhave, and Amartya Sen. In a free-ranging conversation with Malashri Lal, she speaks of her ideals and her experiences, along with the women's empowerment agenda of her generation. Devaki Jain is a recipient of the Padma Bhushan in 2006. She was the founder director of the Institute of Social Studies Trust. She's a founding member of the Indian Association for Women's Studies, as well as Development Alternatives for Women for a New Era, DAWN, a third world network of women social scientists. She's also been the author of many books and essays related to women with special references to their economic growth. Some of these include Tyranny of the Household, investigative essays on women's work, Women's Quest for Power, 5 Indian case studies. She recently published her memoir, The Brass Notebook. Malashri Lal recently retired from her academic and administrative positions at the University of Delhi's English department. She is a member of the English Advisory Board for the Sahitya Academy and the Bharatiya Gyanpith Advisory Committee. Her books include In Search of Sita, Revisiting Mythology, Tagore and the Feminine, A Journey Through Translations. Her most recent book is Betrayed by Hope, a play on the life of Michael Madhusudan Dutt. Do remember that all our sessions that have been broadcast are available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Please do remember to ask questions and comment by typing it into the comment section below, and we'll ask Malashri Lal to pose this of our guest speaker today. Ladies and gentlemen, The Brass Notebook. We're delighted and privileged to have with us Devaki Jain in conversation with Malashri Lal. Malashri, Devaki ji, over to you.
Thank you so much.
Good evening, Devaki Jain. It's indeed a privilege to be discussing your new book on this JLF platform. And when a pioneer in the women's movement, women's studies, writes a memoir, we expect a lot of sparkling revelations and also some important historical perspectives. And I must say I've enjoyed reading the book, every page of it, and I'm happy to share my thoughts as the session progresses. But to begin with the title, it's clearly a throwback to Doris Lessing's The Golden Notebook, and you knew Doris Lessing. So what made you actually decide on this particular title?
Because, it's quite, in a way, it's crazy. I met Doris Lessing decades ago, but I was fascinated with her idea of the 4 notebooks. Of course, I could never achieve that. So I thought, let me remember Doris by giving the book a name, which is sort of derived from her golden notebook, but of course is more suitable for where I come from. So I thought it's a nice way. I wish I could do notebooks. I hope I do a few more, which will be more like, but I like that name of the Brass Notebook as a kind of follow-on of Doris's golden notebook. Because as you must have seen, the book has not one chronological story, like it's not a history. It's books, it's bits. So in a way, it's a notebook. One minute I'm talking of my love affair, another minute I'm talking of South Commission. So it's a notebook.
Indeed, I particularly wondered about the word brass because pital in the world where you grew up in Tamil Nadu, it's an important metal and it's so much a constituent of the household living conditions, the discussion, the cooking utensils. So perhaps I thought you were going to be focusing on the lives of ordinary women, something that you've done throughout your career as an economist. And the brass notebook seemed like such an apt title.
I'm so glad you think so.
To go into some aspects of your childhood, Devki, your father, M.A. Srinivasan, was a minister in the princely state of Mysore. He had several other assignments also. And you pay very moving tributes to your mother, Singamma. You grew up in a large joint family, which of course is full of all kinds of intrigues, joys, shared secrets, all kinds of things happen. And the term that you use is very interesting because you were born in 1933 and you say that we were before midnight's children. So what did you mean by this term before midnight's children? Is it your interest in Gandhiji, the situation in which the movement was before independence, the idealism of the leaders of that time? Is that what makes you say that you were before midnight's children?
You know, there was in a way, we did not quite get into the post-freedom, the pre-freedom struggle because we were too young. I was too young to actually be a freedom fighter like my husband was. He was actually a freedom fighter because he was 17, 18, 19. But being as young as I was, it was not possible to participate in the freedom struggle. So I just thought it would be a nice name since, you know, who wrote Midnight's Children.
Yes.
That we were before Midnight's Children. So it was just a turn of phrase which struck me as defining the time at which we were born and grew up, but not able to participate in the way my husband did in the freedom struggle by carrying placards, giving lectures. So
the idealism of Mahatma Gandhi, Vinoba Bhave, that is very much there in your writing, in your thoughts, in your memoirs. The time that you were able to go to England and to London and were able to stay there on your own as a single, unmarried, unattached young Indian woman, and you always wore your saris, as you say, it seems to be the turning point in your life, the early part of the life for sure. And the passages where you talk about the aspiration to be in Oxford University, you're joining Ruskin College, not really clear at that point that it was a college which mainly catered to the needs of the working class students. And then how you joined there, how you met the people there, how that gave you a window into another way of life and thinking, that of the working class, that everybody did not in Oxford come from a privileged background. And that these people were older, as you mentioned, that they had a variety of experiences to bring to the table. And it seems to me that it's a very poignant kind of a awakening that you went through in connection with this milieu in which you were placed. And you use the term free woman quite often in your memoir. I'm reading a particular passage which moved me immensely. This is from this section of your memoir, and you say, freedom and self-reliance come with risk, and the life of a free woman cannot be insulated from hurt. Sometimes the most we can do is to learn not to be broken by our experiences, to rebuild our lives with what materials are at hand, bit by bit, slowly and patiently. Very pertinent thoughts and beautifully expressed. So my curiosity about your elaborating on that.
you know, as you quite correctly said, the arrival at Ruskin College was by such extraordinary accidents. Here I am traveling to London with my father, who was on the board of Air India, and therefore got a free complimentary ticket for one person every time the board. And he was a generous man. He took my mother first, then my aunt next, then my elder sister, then my turn. And as I got there, I didn't want to come back. Now, how do you do that? Because you're dependent on your father's. So, as you know, I worked London, England at that time, Commonwealth. Even an Indian woman could register and work. But in that working mode, you met a lot of people who were not the upper class, not educated, and they guided me. They said, "Hey, there's a seminar going on. They'd pay your fare. Why don't you go there?" I had to find a way of staying on. So every other day, there would be some offer like that. Then, as I've written, in the boarding house that I stayed in London, the husband of the woman who ran it was a don at Oxford. So she took me there, and then I just fell in love with Oxford. Then the aspiration to go there cannot be fulfilled because it was too late to get admission to any college. So somebody told me there's a labor college, they may have take you. And as I've written, it was hilarious because I've never been a laborer or a worker. But the principal was so fascinated by the fact that there was a 23-year-old dressed in a sari saying, "I want to join Ruskin College." He thought I was mad. But the lucky part is that he had one seat available. And he took me on, and they paid the entire, my board, lodge, tuition. I didn't have to pay a thing. These are accidents in life, which in a way, I'm lucky, I should have had that breakthrough or breakout or breakthrough. Because imagine the chance that I took. Suppose I hadn't got to Ruskin College. What would I have done? I would be earning, because you had the Commonwealth, so you could get £5.10 every week if you wash dishes, if you clean anything. And just living like that would have been pointless. But that Ruskin College entry was a miracle. And he later, when I interviewed him, he said, "I just found it so strange that an upper class girl from India is going to join a labor union. I want to see how she fits." Because all the other students were 35 plus, and I was 22 or 23. And they were all miners, postmen, people with really rough lives. And the hostel was full of them. So he said he wanted to see how I go. And it was the best part of my education was living at Ruskin College with working class people, 8 girls and 35 men, all about 34, 35. And I was 24, 25. And the whole lifestyle was different. You drank beer in the evening, you smoked pipes, you didn't have what are the fussy, as I've parodied the upper class students from India, the Dayals and the Nehrus, and there we were working class. It was such a big difference and something I truly enjoyed. I enjoyed that experience so much that I think it set a platform in my further work, that I got a sense of what it is to be working class. And as you know, all my work in terms of my feminist economics has been to understand women as workers, to count them correctly, to look at their unionization, to look at their neglect. And I think that's where the understanding of class and of workers came. I'm not sure, but I'm just imagining. It was the best experience in my life, I think, being at Ruskin College. And as I've written, other leaders from Africa were funded by the British Commonwealth. So I was in the same class as Tom Mboya. Can you imagine? Tom Mboya, who was a freedom fighter at Kenya. It was eye-opening because I had no understanding of Black, of Africa, of any of the kinds of discrimination and oppression that goes on. Because, you're living in a cloistered family, a civil servants family in Mysore and Bangalore. And there's a world outside which I didn't know about. And that one plunge, and that world came home to me.
Yes, it seems to have made a complete shift in the direction that you may have gone from the background that you came from. And from that, I want to move on to your meeting with Lakshmi Jain, your husband. And again, it's a very beautiful, moving, soul-searching tribute that you pay to Lakshmi Jain throughout the memoir, because it's a lifelong partnership. it's almost a lifelong romance. There's deep emotional attachment, there's intellectual sharing. And Lakshmi Jain was a Gandhian economist and a very idealistic person, an administrator, an institution builder. So, in what way did this partnership of working towards the underprivileged people, and particularly in your case, the women, come out of the relationship with your husband?
I wouldn't like to deny him the tribute that being married to him had an influence. But to be truthful, it was not necessarily the being married to him that influenced me to do all the things I did. We just ran together. We both had similar interests, but I can't say that his contribution to the cooperative union or his concern with the refugees came into me as ideas or ideologies that I have to follow. The brilliant part of it is that I was already into so many things and he was into many things. And we just got married and had a wonderful life together. But I don't think either of us influenced the other in any direction. Because I had already, as you must have noticed, at the age of 21 or even earlier, I had met two Gandhian men in a seminar in Bangalore. That was my first exposure to something outside my family. Those two boys had really turned my mind from what I was, a bureaucrat's daughter, to an activist. That was the seed that was planted by those two young men who were both, as I said, living in Sevagram. So by the time I met Lakshmi, the Gandhian mode of lifestyle was already embedded in me. So I can't say that I got it from him. Those men were khadi wearing. I became khadi wearing even before I met Lakshmi. So the fact that he also had these ideals was just a wonderful thing. But that was not what influenced our passion for each other. That's something that I hope other people will write about. What is it that makes a man and a woman get so passionate? It doesn't matter what ideology, what caste, what religion. Falling in love is a wonderful thing. And I'm so glad that I had that opportunity of falling in love just like that, like a thunderbolt.
Falling in love and staying in love, from what I can see from the book.
Really.
It's beautifully written, all those sections. When we come to the professional study and discipline of economics, during your student years, your teaching years at Delhi University and even otherwise, you came into contact with some of the best known economists of the time, and they were your friends. You didn't come into contact with them as just professional peers. And there are, Amartya Sen has written the foreword to your book, so that friendship obviously continues. Then there are things that are about Jagdish Bhagwati, K. N. Raj, all these economists and the debates that were going on at that time. Your book, Indian Women, was published in 1975, giving a clear direction to your work, not just in economics on the broad base, but on women, and even among the women of the working class. So I'm curious about that kind of a shift, position, and entrenchment that you went into.
Mala, the knowing of these famous economists, K. N. Raj, Amartya Sen, Shukumoy, it was one of those brilliant coincidences that I joined Miranda House at the same time that all these wonderful, brilliant men happened to be there. For example, Amartya was there, and soon after he left and went off to England and then to Cambridge, Harvard. So Shukumoy also was there. But it was just that was an era where these 4 or 5 brilliant, globally recognized male economists happened to be at Delhi school. It had nothing to do with me. It was my luck that I was also in the university at that time. Now, to get to know them, there's a funny story which I couldn't tell because it was probably not enough space. But there was a crowd called the Oxbridge crowd. Those of us who came back from Oxford or Cambridge. Today it may be a large one, but in those days it was a cloistered one. They were mostly people who were pretty well off. And I met Amartya Sen in a party given by one of those Cambridge Oxford economists, the son of a famous civil servant. And the friendship continued only by miraculously, just that it was not that we fell in love with each other, it was not that we were doing the same probing of economics, but just something which was an idea of friendship. And later on, as Amartya got into the issue of women, you remember he wrote about women. He acknowledges me in his first article called The Status of Women in India in the Cambridge Journal. He says, I owe this to Devaki Jain for opening my eyes to this issue. So the interaction with people like Raj, Amartya Sen, Chukumoy was a coincidence. The Delhi school should have had all these wonderful diamonds there, and I should have been at Miranda House at the same time. They left, as you know, piece by piece, except for K and Raj, they all left. And I had to leave because of my marriage and children. So it was just a golden time in India in a way, the 60s, that everybody was enthusiastic. There was much dreaming and hoping that India would be a different kind of place. So it says my internet is not connectable. Can you hear me?
Yes,
she can't.
You're fine. I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear
I'm
you.
sorry, my internet is collapsed.
No, we can hear you. Just go ahead. We can hear you.
So,
okay.
Devaki, my question arising from this is the formulation of the phrase from you about the feminization of poverty. It's become like a signpost in the women's movement. And the way you describe it, it's a long passage and I won't go into it. But the few key phrases are here. Women have a higher incidence of poverty than men. That women's poverty is more severe than that of men. Now, this kind of conviction and commitment comes from the people you met, this field work that you did, the research. So I'm curious again to know what brought about this idea of the feminization of poverty and something that you worked on throughout your career as an economist.
It's a very good question you're asking. I cannot say I had a brilliant answer, but I'll make one correction of what you said. I have not liked the term feminization of poverty. When people talk about it, I talk of pauperization of women. You know, the cause and the effect makes a difference. Pauperization of women is what I'm saying, that women remain poor and are made to be poor because of the kind of both intra-household dynamics and the kind of lack of opportunity for working outside because of lack of support services. So there are many issues which makes the Indian woman worker at the bottom a real slave to the world outside her. So why did I go into the worker issue? The worker issue came to me because I was trying to correct the National Sample Survey's way of measuring and counting workers. I had no interest at that time, particularly in poor women. But the study revealed to me that the women who are coming from the landless classes worked for more hours than the men of the landless classes because of the pressure not only of earning, but it's also my belief that women are overconscious and maybe burdened with a sense of responsibility for the survival of the family, which the men don't have. You must have heard so many stories of women working in the Maharashtra Employment Guarantee site to finish the 9 cubic feet they had to do, and men at the same time not finishing the 9 cubic feet, but going to a liquor shop to drink at that time. So women's sense of responsibility is actually poignant, and it really accounts for much of the oppression they feel, the oppression, the hunger, the deprivation, the bad health, the sense of responsibility. This is something I wish we would write more about. What is it that makes a woman so responsible for her family, for the survival, for her mother, for her father? Even Amartya has written that when the father loses his wife, it's the daughter who comes and looks after him and not the son. And yet in the Hindu tradition, you think the son will be the bearer of the responsibility. But he did a study in Bengal and he found that it's the daughters who came and looked after their widowed father. So I argue that the women of India and all over the world are the more responsible citizens. If they're poor, they take care of the hunger of their children and the family. If they're better off and their father lost, and this happened to us also. We three daughters looked after my father after he lost his wife, much more than the four brothers that we had.
Use the term poor woman, and in fact you comment that not everybody was very comfortable with that term.
Yeah.
So what is your understanding of, within quotes, poor woman? And yes, some people might see that it's a condescending kind of a term, or that it refers to the Dickensian kind of a workhouse situation. Why did you choose that term and stick by it?
What is the point in trying to put a curtain on the reality? I mean, they are poor for God's sake. And to say that the word poor is demeaning is because we are demeaning ourselves by letting them be poor. So I couldn't quite catch that feeling that it's demeaning to call somebody poor. I'd rather just think of them as poor. So that's why I had a conflict with those who said the word poor is demeaning, it puts people into a kind of black box. But I think that's a reality, and therefore I use that word.
You have a very good chapter, very insightful readings of what was happening in Africa, South Africa. Lakshmi Jain was invited to represent the country there. The country, South Africa, had just become independent. You met Nelson Mandela. The nation building enterprise there was at its inception, and you were very much a part of that. You met some of the greatest leaders of that era in South Africa. What are your thoughts about it now in the context of what was the vision and what happened? What was your role and what is your memory of those meetings?
That's a very ticklish question you're asking, because Mbeki, who succeeded Mandela, his wife and I are very close friends, and she's actually registered to listen to this conversation. I wouldn't like to blame anyone. You know, there is something that happens when countries are colonized. This is something I've seen with my naked eyes, as they say. When I was earlier in the South Commission with Julius Nyerere, we visited so many countries like Mozambique. And you know, the way colonizers suck out not only the resources, but the stamina of the countries they colonize is incredible. It's what they did in Mozambique, what they did in Liberia, what they must have done in other countries. So I quote to that because I say that devastation of a country where you colonize, and though you may say South Africa was not colonized, the Dutch the people who put apartheid on the agenda were white people who were exploiting the resources of a black country. So I argue that that kind of denuding was really hurtful. And though there were a lot of movements like the famous conciliatory Truth Commission that Bishop Tutu chaired, it never left the Black African population satisfied. They felt that by coming into kind of reconciliation with the white people, they had surrendered to the cruelty that the white people. So there's full of conflict. South Africa is full of conflict. It was even during the pre-apartheid, during the apartheid, and even after liberation, I think there is conflict. And there is a lot of compassion, I feel, because that particular type of colonization was different from ours. We could throw out the whites. But there, what the apartheid regime did was to denude the black. So now for them to come back to build their own country has been full of struggle and conflict.
That's a very...
Sorry.
So that's a very interesting comparison as to what colonization meant for India and what it meant for South Africa. So coming to the situation today, yes, you've had a very long track as an economist, as a feminist thinker. What are your views on feminism and nonviolence now? There's a wonderful line where you celebrate Gloria Steinem and yourself, and you say, we swing together even as we pass the ripe ages of 85 plus due to the grounding and belief in feminism and nonviolence. What are your thoughts about feminism in India today?
It's a word that is being used widely by young women in India, and there's no inhibition about using the word feminist. But when we came up with that word in the 70s, 80s, it was considered an American import, and I was accused of being Americanized. But actually, it means it gives a certain identity to women who are wanting to have a philosophical, ideological stand on what it means to be a woman, because it's an ism. It's not just woman, it's an ism, it's a philosophy. And I now have moved from looking at it only as a woman thing to looking at it as the theory of justice. I've written about this saying feminism is a theory of justice. It argues for justice. It is not necessarily only for women to compete with men or overpower men, that there should be a just world where men, women, and all the LGBTQ um, types of people should all have a sense of their rights. So feminism gave us a door to um, enter that kind of language, which removes removes women from being only woman, but something which is, she's also got a philosophical view of the world, a feminist. So it takes her from being a gender person to a person who has a view on the world, of justice, of rights for everyone. At least I've seen it like that. But I can tell you that if there are 1 million women in the world, we have 1 million definitions of feminism. We can never agree. So I'm putting forward mine with deep respect to those who may not agree with me.
The search for justice and equity is, of course, a very valuable one. And I would go along with what you say are the priorities. So, is there any favorite passage in the book that you'd like to read for us?
What passage?
Passage that is a favorite with your in your mind?
Not particularly, but if you would like to, haven't thought about it. But, one of the things that really made me feel I'll write this book was because of my love and regard for my mother. Now, it's not unusual for people to be crazy about their mothers and write about mothers. I don't know if you remember Marcel Proust wrote entirely about his mother. So, if you ask me for a favorite chapter, I would like to talk about my mother. But if you have something else that you would like, I would be quite happy to do that. What do you think?
Well, yes, the section on the mother is the last one when you talk about Akka.
No, I have this sad chapter which I really like, the Requiem. That is when you about my death of my mother and the death of my husband. People told me, why do you do that? It was really so deep in my heart, the way she did not want to die, and why she did not want to die, and then how she did die. And look at it. She says, her nightmares, she told me, were of priests with white caste marks on their forehead performing last rites. The thing to do, she said, was to live. She took good care of her health, moving away from antibiotics and other modern pills. When she was found that they were making her weaker, she sought all through her life to be self-reliant and was ever vigilant about any loss of health. And then I go to the point where she was actually dying. She didn't want to. And she felt terribly upset that she couldn't breathe and they couldn't bring the right machine And I saw that happen because I was there when she breathed her last in the hospital. It just shook me so much that a woman like her who wanted to live couldn't be saved of a simple illness, which where the phlegm got into her throat. My sister and I, who were very close to her, wanted to burn the hospital. Can you imagine? Our anger was so great. We thought we'll go to the nursing home and set it on fire for not having the machine which would have sucked out the phlegm that was throttling her. So I like that part. It was hard for me to write it, but I just had to write it. In fact, I started with these this sadness, and then one of the professors in England, in Oxford, who I first thought I would choose to guide me, though she couldn't. She said, "Don't start with that. End with that."
It's a very, very well structured book, Devki. And there's a lot about the sisterhood and friendships. I love that. There's a wonderful passage on page 164 when you talk about how Gloria Steinem introduced you to Alice Walker. And you mentioned in that, so there were four of us, Gloria, Oprah, Alice, and myself, sitting together watching the first show of the dramatization of The Color Purple. What a celebratory moment, indeed.
Yeah, it was a great moment. And all this I owe to Gloria. You know the story of Gloria and me, that she was in Miranda House in 1956 or 57, and I would come to Delhi at that time. I was working in the Indian Cooperative Union. We met only because the societies were very small. Somebody comes with a Fulbright scholarship, they come and meet some of the young activists. And my husband and his group were at that time very well known for being doing good work like refugee rehabilitation. My husband was the creator of the Cottage Industries Emporium, and he was young. So people would come to his flat, and I was working in the same organization. So Gloria came to that flat. As two unmarried girls, we got to be very close friends. That friendship that started in 1960, whatever, 50s, stayed, but we didn't really know, we didn't travel, we didn't have. Then when she came out as a Ms. Magazine, which was such a dramatic entry. But interestingly, we could bond again, and we bonded as women who were working for women's rights without knowing that the other person was doing the same thing. Because in those days, you didn't have internet, you didn't have phone calling. So I discovered her on the cover of the Time magazine saying Ms. Gloria Steinem had let go a new word called Ms. So I asked a friend, how do I contact her? And she said, oh, how interesting that I'd written my book on Indian women and she had launched something called Ms. And we had done it without any communication with each other. Anyway, that friendship.
That's a lovely story. There's a related question that has come into the box just now, Devki. This is Varsha Shenoy who's saying, is there any chapter or extract from Devaki Jain's memoir which can be included in the English language textbook for high school or +2 level students to give the students a glimpse of Indian women's activism or feminism? I think that's a lovely question, which really means that the memoirs are extremely relevant right now. You know, here is a person saying school children should be reading this.
What do you think? What chapter? Because some of those chapters,
this is
not like the children to read about myself.
And I'll tell you which my favorite chapter is. And that is the chapter 16, which is called Rethinking Economics. Because that is the chapter in which you get Devaki Jain's core commitment to how the world can be made better if only we attended to the needs of the underprivileged and the poor women.
You're very, very, very helpful. I'd forgotten about my Rethinking Economics chapter. I'm so glad you brought it up. It really is, at the moment, the heart of what I'm doing. I'm really concentrating on how we can put forward into the world's thought spaces, how the economics that we have inherited has to be pushed right, and a new economics. And I also argue that new economics can get its inspiration from Gandhi, that is starting from the poorest. It's still possible, but I don't think it's easy to do because the world has become very greedy and capitalistic. But I think if you listen more to women in the grassroots, you can probably redefine economics. It's a very idealistic thing to say, and probably I'll be trashed for it.
I like to believe that idealism has a place in our world. And reading your memoir, looking into what has happened in the last 50, 60 years that you have recounted, and I have myself been a part of the academic side of the women's movement, there is hope. And women are getting much more aware, women are getting more active, the leadership is there. And your book is indeed very, very inspiring, Devki. It's a book with integrity, honesty, forthrightness, and brilliantly written. So thank you very much. It's been wonderful talking to you about the book and getting these special insights. Thank you, JLF. And I hand the session back to Sanjoy Roy.
Thank you, Malashri Lal, and
Sorry.
thank you so much, Devaki Jain, for writing the book and being on this session. And as you said, the new economics or economics that needs to be provided for this time is really after listening to those at the grassroots level and looking to empathy and equity and empowerment, the poorest of the poor, and of course, for women. Absolutely fascinating session. Thank you so much. We hope that you're going to start writing the second volume of this particular book. And we look forward to actually hosting you at live at the Jaipur Literature Festival in coming years. Thank you both. Thank you all for watching. We're sorry we couldn't take all the questions. This was such a fascinating session. But do log back for our next session, Tracking in the Age of the World Wide Web. Perry Chen and Monica Narula in conversation. Traditionally, trackers were used to lead us to animals, people, or lost geographical features concealed in jungles and wildernesses. Today, we need help in navigating the complex and bewildering world of technology. Please join Perry Chen and Monica Narula, who's the co-founder of the Rux Media Collective, with avowed attention of forcing viewers to look anew at everyday sites taken for granted. And this will be at 8:30 p.m. IST, 3 p.m. GMT, and 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Till then, stay safe.